There are certain mitzvot, for example, that require kavanah according to everybody today, and that is every morning that we have the Shema Yisrael. You should understand as best as possible what you're saying, at least in those very first words. Even though you may not understand the rest of the Shema, the rest of the other chapters, but at least that very first pasuk, which basically implies that you're taking upon yourself, you're assuming the yoke of the mitzvot. Shema Yisrael, of course, has always been a verse that was popular amongst all Jews and that was used at times of danger. If a Jew felt that this were his last moments, he wanted to re-emphasize or re-identify himself with his people. And those were sometimes his last words. So there are certain mitzvot that, of course, require more kavanah than others, that one needs to really know what he's doing, what he's saying. But it remains a discussion in the Gemara, and it was not decided either way. Different rabbis have different opinions as to today, do we say that mitzvot require kavanah or not? And of course, the majority of opinions today is that mitzvot need to have kavanah. However, there are some cases where if there was no kavanah, it is still considered valid. For example, if a woman fell off the roof into a lake, into a river that was kosher for mikveh, but she did not mean to immerse herself, she just fell in. Is she okay? Is the impurity gone? Or since she did not mean to immerse herself, she just fell in, then it doesn't count? The answer is it does count, because the impurity is gone regardless of what she meant. As long as she immersed herself in the water that had the requirements for kosher mikveh, she's okay, she's clean, she can be with her husband. So there are other such examples. And one of them we'll be discussing tonight, of course, is the Korban Pesach. If you ate the Pesach, if you ate matzot, even though perhaps you weren't thinking about what you were doing, the fact that you ate them constitutes the fact that you fulfilled the mitzvah. Nevertheless, what is behind this discussion in the Gemara? I want to use this as an introduction. What are they arguing about? They're arguing as follows. Every mitzvah has two parts to it. The part that you're doing, the tzivui Hashem commanded us to do something. You're following His order. You respect Him, you acknowledge Him, and you demonstrate that by fulfilling His mitzvah, His commandment, His decrees. The other part of it, the rabbis tell us in the Kabbalah, that every mitzvah we benefit from. Hashem doesn't need our mitzvot. It is good, of course, when we follow the mitzvot, that we demonstrate that we're Jewish, that we are sincere. We don't just say a lot and talk a lot, but we actually do things. Another part of the mitzvah, is, however, is something that we benefit from it directly. I'm not talking about the easy ones, the ones that were meant to maintain a social order. Give charity, don't steal, don't kill, which even the non-Jewish world adapted. I'm talking about every mitzvah in the Torah. Regardless of its nature, we are told that we directly benefit from them. Kosher, for example, the dietary laws. It may just be that one of the reasons has to do with health reasons. That is not the only reason. It's definitely not the main reason why the kosher laws were given to us. Eventually we'll get to them. We will be discussing the dietary laws. Why is it forbidden to eat shrimp, for example? One may think that in his logical mind, that, for example, kosher laws, many of the animals that are non-kosher are predators. And we have a famous saying that you are what you eat. So, therefore, don't eat certain animals so you don't get their nature. Even though, generally speaking, the truth behind the laws of kosher do have a lot to do with the type of animal, that it's unclean or that it's a predator and so forth. For example, rats and mice, they crawl and they eat and they consume all sorts of things that may be impure. So, of course, all of these reasons are acceptable and they're valid. But ultimately, there are other reasons, some of them which we may never know. But one thing we do know, we benefit, we derive something out of the mitzvah. It's not only that we're doing His will, which is important, but we get something out of it. So the question is, in the discussion of the Gemara, the question is, what is the bare minimum that one needs to do to fulfill a mitzvah? Is it that you need to have in mind what you're doing, that it's the fulfillment of God's Torah? And if you do not do so, then it's incomplete. You haven't done anything. If you weren't thinking about it, if you weren't thinking, I'm doing this because it's a mitzvah, then it's incomplete and therefore it's not worth anything. Or perhaps it's worth a little bit. There's something there. After all, you did do something. And since that's something you derive a benefit from, since it's left some impression somewhere in heaven, and You've done something, you've acted upon something, so perhaps the bare minimum was done. Is that bare minimum acceptable or not? That's the discussion. Some rabbis say no, the bare minimum is not acceptable because it's incomplete. If you did not have the kavanah, then it's incomplete, so there's nothing there. And the others perhaps are the opinion that something is there. Even though it's incomplete, there is a bare minimum, and the bare minimum is acceptable. That's basically the discussion between the rabbis. But in reality, everybody agrees that ideally a mitzvah should be done as follows. The Kabbalah says a mitzvah, in order for it to be complete, has to be done b'dibur, b'machshava, u'b'maaseh. Dibur, well, let's begin in the right order. B'machshava is with the thoughts. Dibur is with your voice, with your mouth. And maaseh is with your deeds. Who controls the machshava? Who's in charge of the machshava, the thought process? The neshama, the soul. Who's in charge of the dibur? So the Kabbalah says the ruach, the spirit. It is because of the spirit that that the human being has in him that he's able to speak. Whereas animals don't have that special spirit, they cannot speak. And then there is the guf, the body, the hands, the feet, the eyes, the ears. They are capable of ma'asim, of deeds, and therefore they are responsible for that part. Who will reap the rewards of the mitzvot in Olam Haba? The body rots in the grave. And I think I mentioned last week that after the year 6000, there are no bodies. Everything is souls. Right? And we are told there's another rule, that's schar mitzvah b'haya al maleka. There's no reward for your deeds in this world. Even though some people appear to be very successful and doing great, it does not mean that they're getting paid for what they did, good or bad. Because this world is a temporary world, and mitzvot are a different currency. You can never pay somebody for one mitzvah, for one day of putting on tefillin. You cannot pay him in this world. Just like you can't give somebody 10 murder sentences. How could you kill somebody 10 times? So how are you going to punish him? So it must be in the world to come. So everybody agrees that the reward and punishment, for the most part, is in the world to come. And who gets it? The soul. Because there are no bodies in the world to come. So what about the body? The body works so hard. Some people go to pray on Shabbat 3 miles, they walk. So shouldn't that, to pray to the Bet HaKnesset, especially in the valley where people live so far away. Techiyat HaMetim, right, Techiyat HaMetim will occur before the year 6000. We hope very, very soon, when the dead will rise. And for however number of years remain till the year 6000, the body and the soul will both reap some reward. In other words, the majority of the reward will go to the soul. It made the decisions of right or wrong, but the body will enjoy 200 or so years. We have 242 years left, I believe, till the year 6000. And if Mashiach comes now, we're told that within 40 years, Techiyat HaMetim will be complete. It's a process that will take 40 years, during which the first dead to rise will be in Eretz Israel, not in the USA. So that's why some people like to be buried over there. By the way, I have some advice for those who want to be buried over there. The land of Israel does not like it when you live outside of Israel and you want to be buried there. It does not like the fact that people bring dead corpses there. It likes live people. If you lived there, if you really cared for it, if you went there, you supported it, and then you happen to have died outside of Israel, fine. But just to live here all your life, never visit, never care, and to be buried there, we have a tradition that unless you were a saint and you were a righteous man, you will be thrown out. The body is somehow thrown out of Israel. Don't ask me how, but it's thrown out. And those who were buried outside of Israel, but who always wanted to go to Israel and never could make it, their bodies will roll over into Israel. Talking about the mitzvot, that they have to be b'machshava, b'dibur, ma'aseh. We got into this because we're talking about the soul. The soul is the one that makes the decisions, and that begins the thought process. That leads to dibur, and that leads to ma'aseh. A lot of people say, I'm a good Jew at heart. I have a lot of good intentions, good thoughts, good ideas. But you know the famous saying, hell is full of people with good intentions, right? What could you do with good intentions, good thoughts? A thought by itself is worthless. It's nice, a person has beautiful thoughts, but if he doesn't carry them out, doesn't do anything with them, a lot of people have beautiful thoughts. They'd love to do this, they have a lot of plans, and they never do anything. Before they realize they're 40 years old, they're 45, they're 50, they're still single, they never got married. They had beautiful thoughts when they were 20. As soon as they find the right girl, they'll settle down, they'll do this, they'll keep that, they'll learn an hour a day, they'll begin giving charity. Some people even say, I promise that as soon as I make a little over $50,000, I'll begin giving ma'aser, tithing. Before that, I needed every penny. People have a lot of thoughts. They never end up doing anything. Machshava by itself means nothing. That takes us to, let's skip one. Let's go to Maaseh first. You need Maaseh, you need action, you need deeds. Because these ultimately prove if you are sincere or not. The Reform, the conservatives, who do not fulfill the Mitzvot of the Torah, are very far from being genuine. Even though, let's assume just for this example, that some of their claims might have some merit. That perhaps certain things need to be accommodated and adjusted. What's wrong with doing it the way everybody else did it? Why do you have to be different? Why are you better than your great-grandfather who did not feel you the way you do? The answer is very simple. The less you do, the easier it is. There's no true justification for not doing the mitzvot. They simply want it to be easier on them. It's easier for them to live with goyim, to go to your universities, to go to lunch with another friend. It's easier, so they find justifications for it. But in reality, there's no reason why they could not do what their grandparents did. Even though it's hard, if you really mean it, if you really believe in it, then there's no problem. Some of them, of course, say they don't believe in it. Well, what are you going to tell them? I'm talking about the ones who will slightly believe in the Torah. So ultimately, Ma'asim, the deeds, prove how sincere you are. Do you believe in it? Do you really believe in the Torah? Do you believe that Hashem gave the Torah? Then why don't you keep Shabbat? Well, it's not easy. No, you can't have it both ways. Either you believe and you keep, or you don't believe. See, there's a big difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews. I haven't seen this anywhere else in the world except in Mexico, where somebody is going to eat matzah on Pesach, but he will have not kosher meat in the matzah, not kosher cheese. He has to have matzah on Pesach, but the food will not be kosher. How could you live with a contradiction? Either you believe or you don't believe. Ashkenazim are either way. You don't find halfways. Ashkenazi Jews, traditionally, I've noticed, either they're observant or they're not observant. It's either or. But Sephardic Jews, for some reason, still feel an attachment. They know the truth. They just can't get away from it. Their parents and sometimes their grandparents were rabbis. And they somehow got caught up with the environment and the pressures and so forth, and they let go a little bit, but not everything. Told you the story of the criminal in Israel, where all of Israel was looking for him, and he disguised himself. He painted his hair. It was very hard to find him. Israeli police set up roadblocks everywhere. They looked into the cars, every car with flashlights, and finally one policeman suspected this guy. You look familiar. Come out. And sure enough, he looked closely at him, and it was the criminal who got away, who escaped from jail. He was a Sephardic from Morocco, and guess what he was holding in his hand? A Tehillim. In other words, even though he was one of the worst criminals, he still believed in God. So ultimately, Eliyahu the prophet criticizes this. You can't have both worlds. You can't have the cake and eat it. You can't be in two roads at the same time. Either you believe in God or you do not believe in God. I'm not saying that to believe in nothing is better. Of course, those who have something are slightly better off than those who have nothing. Nevertheless, this is not a good. It's a hypocrisy. It's not a good thing. You're not going anywhere. Anybody who thinks he's doing himself a favor or God by coming to Yom Kippur in a car, he's wrong. Stay home. Stay home. Don't desecrate the day, and pray in your bedroom or in your living room, whichever room you prefer. But don't drive the car on Yom Kippur or on Shabbat. People say it's a big thing to come to pray. Sure, yes, but don't desecrate. And the rabbis call it mitzvah haba be'avera. You do a mitzvah through an avera, through a sin. You stole the lulav of your neighbor, but you wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav. How could you do that? I mean, you can't have it that way. So therefore, ma'asim are important, deeds are important, because thoughts alone are nothing. You need deeds to complete the thought process. How about deeds without thoughts? So we just talked about thoughts without deeds. They're incomplete, they're nothing. But what about deeds without thoughts? Also not. They're not, ideally, if you do something without thinking about it, what's wrong with it? What could it mean? It could mean you did it because of the routine. Mitoch shigra, like we say. You did it, like many people pray every morning. Routine. They don't even pay attention to what they're saying. They put on tefillin. They don't know what they're doing. You have to think about it. when you think about it, you have kavanah, you're prepared for it, it's very different than if you're not doing it. So even though a deed is important, if it's without thoughts beforehand, without preparation, proper preparation, then it's also somewhat incomplete. So what is the role of dibur? What is the role of talking about it? You know, some people have a custom to say, Hineni mukhan zuman lekayem mitzvah azu. I am prepared and I'm about to fulfill this following mitzvah, whatever it might be. Even though the Torah doesn't tell us that you need to say those words, nevertheless, it's a good thing to do. My father has a custom, I think his father had a custom. Many Jews have a custom that on Shabbat, right before they taste the soup or the fish or whatever it might be, they say Lichvot Shabbat Kodesh. In other words, to sanctify the food, to show how special it is, how thankful you are for it. It gives it more meaning. You don't have to say those words. And I thought that was very nice, and I try as much as possible to say it too. It adds meaning to the whole day of Shabbat and to the food that you have. So what does dibur do? Dibur directs the thoughts. We cannot tell what the gentleman is thinking unless he starts speaking. The words direct the thoughts. They tell us in what direction he's going. For example, if you see somebody who's about to kill somebody, are you going to let him do it? Why not? Well, perhaps the guy who he's killing is a criminal. Perhaps he's defending himself. Perhaps there's a lot more that you don't know. It would be wise to ask questions before you do anything, right? You might be shooting the wrong person. Let's use a better example. Let's say you're a policeman and you're chasing a car, like last night, right? You're chasing. Are you going to try to stop him? Or perhaps you might give him a chance. Perhaps his wife is pregnant and about to deliver, taking her to the hospital. You should check it out as much as possible. Somehow communicate with the person to find out what's going on before you take actions. You may regret it. You might be getting the wrong person. The rabbis tell us that if we see Reuven killing Shimon or about to kill Shimon, we need to warn him. 2 witnesses have to observe it and have to warn him, because we need to find out if what he was doing was intentional, if he knew what he was doing, if he knew that what he's doing is prohibited against the Torah, if he was sane. We need to find out this before this person does it. Otherwise, we're not sure. He could have been insane. He could have not known what he's doing. Even though murder is obvious, but that's just an example. With any mitzvah, any avirah, if we're not sure what he's doing, we have to warn him. Do you know that this is not permitted to do on Shabbat? What you're about to do? Oh, I didn't know that one. It makes a difference, because if one knows what he's doing and knows that it's wrong and still does it, it makes a big difference than if he did not know. So that is the purpose of dibur. Dibur basically directs the thought process when knowing what direction it's going, but dibur also serves another purpose. When somebody speaks about something, he awakens himself. When you're only thinking about it, it's not as strong as when you talk about it. When you begin to talk about it, you awaken yourself. You become more conscious about what you're about to do. Therefore, there is this, eventually we'll get to it, there's a mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we talk about the miracles that happen. I'm sure all of you have been to a seder. What goes on in the seder besides the good food is the talk about the miracles that happened. The purpose of that is to enlighten the children and everybody who's sitting there as to what happened, to excite them. And when you talk about the mitzvah, what happened, the miracles, even though you're telling the story, you yourself get excited from it. So the purpose, eventually we'll discuss it in more detail, the purpose of, for example, of telling over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim is not only to excite the kids, not only to bring out their curiosity, not only to get them to ask questions, not only to get them involved, and also those who are attending, but you yourself, when you start speaking about it, you realize how great and wonderful those miracles are. And that is why, that's what the Torah says, Vidatem ki ani Hashem. When you talk about it, you will know that I'm Hashem, I'm God. Talk about it. So that is the purpose of talking about it. So not only do you awaken yourself, you awaken others. Because the purpose of all the mitzvot is not something private for you to do, it's for others to see as well. Just like the Chanukiah we place in the living room window or in a window where people can see from the outside. We want to publicize the miracles, we want to publicize what happened. The same with every mitzvah. Not every mitzvah can you publicize. For example, there is a mitzvah to slaughter a cow. You don't have to go right now to slaughter a cow, but if you want to eat meat, you need to slaughter it. You don't have to put up a mezuzah unless you have a home. If you want to be a homeless person and live under the 101 freeway, you don't need a mezuzah there. There are certain mitzvot that are only required under certain circumstances. The conditions are right. And therefore, some mitzvot do not need to be publicized. I mean, most people know that if you're Jewish, you were probably circumcised. You're not publicizing this. Everybody, hopefully, should know that. But on the very day of the circumcision, we do publicize it. We make a big party. And since we're talking about big parties, even though I'm getting a little bit off the subject, I think it's important to mention this. Some people only make parties when there's a boy, and not when there's a girl. It's a big mistake. Every child is precious. Every child is a gift from God. And there was a story about 10 years ago or so that a father of a 30-year-old girl, I think she was about 30, came to the Stipler Rav, big rabbi, in Bnei Brak. Says, I don't understand, my girl can't get married. All the shidduchim, all the boys that she went out with, somehow either they don't want or she doesn't want. What's going on? She's a beautiful girl, she's an intelligent girl, she's a nice girl. What's wrong? So the Stipler rabbi, who was a very special person, he was a righteous saint, he asked the man, the father of the girl, tell me, when your daughter was born, did you ever make a seudat mitzvah, a seudah of some sort, some meal, did you ever thank God for this beautiful gift? Like we have a custom to do, no matter how large or small. Did you ever do something? He says, no, I never did. She's a girl, so we never, brit milah, circumcision of a boy, you make something, you have a mohel, you have a family. With the girl, I never made anything. He says, go ahead and immediately do something. So he comes to his shul and he says, I'm sorry, it's a belated simcha, 30 years after the fact, but I wanted to take this opportunity to invite everybody here to the birth of my girl 30 years ago. And of course, this is a way of thanking God for giving me this beautiful daughter. A week later, she got engaged. Yeah. Don't hold back thanking God for all that He's done with you personally, privately, or of course with the Jewish nation as a whole. We must acknowledge that He's doing this for us. If we think all of this is just a coincidence, it happens, things happen, then He may not do it again, God forbid. If you appreciate it, if you acknowledge it, then He will do it again. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit of the purpose of doing a mitzvah completely, thinking about it, talking about it, doing it, we'll begin with mitzvah number 5, 6, 7, and 8. The Sefer HaChinuch, which is an excellent book for explaining the mitzvot, says as follows. Many of the mitzvot in Pesach have many details to them, all sorts of details, which we'll cover some tonight. You may wonder, he says, why so many details? Why this and that? Why do we need to do this so and so? He says, remember the following rule. Let me see if I have it written here somewhere. Yeah. He says the following word is in Hebrew. Achrei ha'peulot nimshachot halevavot. The hearts follow the deeds. In other words, just like we are influenced by the environment we're in, from our friends, from our teachers, from the schools we go to, the books we read, they all have some influence. The same occurs with the peulot. When you start doing certain things, even though you become used to them, it becomes a routine, you do certain things, you are influenced by them. If you act in a particular way, you are influenced by the way you act. If you're continuously demanding of your children, yelling at them, or doing worse things, that eventually affects your temper and affects the way you do business with people, perhaps. The way you get used to, the way you train your mind eventually becomes part of you. And your heart becomes like that, even though it may not have been at once that way. For example, during the wars of Israel, the Torah tells us that only the rabbis would go out. Rabbis, righteous people who did not sin. Whoever sinned was told to stay home. He may get killed. He may fall in battle. Nevertheless, these same great people who would go to battle would have all sorts of challenges. And I'm not going to get into all the examples of the challenges that they would have, but one of them was a challenge called Eshet Yifat Toar. A beautiful woman that they would see from the enemy, that they would be permitted to take and marry her, of course, convert her, and so forth. And everybody asks, how is it possible that somebody should fall for something like that? We're talking about righteous people. The answer is very easy. These people were righteous. They remained righteous and good when they were in their homes, in their yeshivot, in their surroundings. If you let somebody loose in a jungle, he's going to become wild. War is wild. War is a jungle, especially a lengthy, protracted war. You see all sorts of cruel things going out there. I read a book about the special commando unit in Israel called Yechidat 101. Their training was so rigorous that when they came back after years of training and years of being out there doing what they were doing, their wives could not recognize them. They were no longer compassionate, soft-spoken. They were completely different. It would take many, many years, perhaps, for them to get out of it. So the exposure does affect us, depending on what you're exposed to. So the same is with the mitzvot. The same is with whatever we do, from cutting to sewing, whatever you might be doing, it affects us in the long run. So a lot of the details that we're going to see with the Korban Pesach, for example, ultimately they have one goal. The mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, with all its details, is to remember the miracles that Hashem did for us in Egypt. That is the goal of the Korban Pesach. Bringing the Korban Pesach, you're supposed to remember, by doing what you're supposed to be doing, the miracles that He performed for us, to be happy, to celebrate that, to thank Him. However, there are several mitzvot along the way with the Korban Pesach. So let's discuss each one separately. It shouldn't take us too long. Again, we have 4. The first one is the Korban Pesach itself, the sacrifice, bringing a sacrifice. Number 6 is eating the sacrifice. Number 7 we'll be discussing is that this Korban Pesach had to be eaten as a barbecued. It could not be fried, it could not be cooked, it could not be baked, it had to be barbecued. And number 8, there are some more, we'll leave them for next week. Number 8 is not to leave over any, lolotir, not to leave over anything. You had to consume it all in one night. Whatever was left over, you had to burn. So again, there's quite a few details. Let's begin with the Korban Pesach itself. The word Korban comes from the root karev, to come close. Most sacrifices, well, I shouldn't say most, but many sacrifices you would bring near the Mizbeach or on top of the Mizbeach. Some parts of it would be burnt on the altar, other parts would be eaten by the Kohanim. It would all depend on the sacrifice. There are only 2 or so sacrifices that the Kohanim do not have a share. Kohanim, the priests, would have a share of many of the sacrifices. Sometimes they would have the entire sacrifice for themselves. But there is a Korban, or there's actually 2 at least, that the Kohanim do not have almost anything of it, especially Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is completely nechal lebe'alim. The owners, the ones who brought it, they eat it all. It's theirs. The Kohanim have no share. Not even the usual things that they're supposed to get from every sacrifice, from every animal, they get nothing. This animal is eaten and consumed by its owners. So Korban, the word Korban, meaning to bring near, also says something else. It is a symbolic way, because God does not need the Korban, the sacrifice. So it is a symbolic way, it is a means of giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu by using this animal. The word Korban, the root, again, as I said before, means to come close. By a person doing something, whatever it might be, of giving acknowledgement, thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the automatic result of that is that he becomes closer himself to God. They tell us, for example, and the rabbis tell us that God does not make miracles for everybody. You know, some people complain and say, if God would only show me one miracle, I would be a believer right away. Well, first of all, He doesn't have to repeat all the miracles just for you. He's already performed it once. We already said Na'aseh v'nishma. We will follow, we will heed. Your parents believed in it. He doesn't have to, for every individual out there who wants Him to prove Himself again, He has to prove. He doesn't have to prove Himself. He already did so once. But there's another thing. The rabbis also tell us that God continues to perform miracles only to those who will appreciate it, who will understand what it's all about, and their faith as a result will be strengthened. But those it will not move them that much, He does not perform a miracle. And of course, there are many such individuals who saw a miracle and immediately became more observant, more religious. And some who, yes, it appears to be a miracle, but I'm not sure. And the best example is the Scud missile attack in Israel. Even the non-religious ministers in the Knesset said, yes, apparently it's a miracle. Some of them were open about it. It is. Well, how many of them are wearing kippot today or tzitzit? I really don't know how many. I don't know if any. But this is supposed to be clear. So a miracle does not necessarily always move somebody in the direction of believing. We had miracles in the days of the Bet HaMikdash. We had prophets telling people what the future will be, and people still committed the sins. So the miracle does not necessarily will make or break somebody. However, when somebody acknowledges, when somebody says thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when somebody says I understand what you did, and I see it clearly that this was a miraculous event, and he does something as a result, he brings a sacrifice. This, what appears to be insignificant animal, nevertheless is an act, it's a deed. And as we just said before, the deeds, if we do them steadily, day after day, if you pray day after day, you put on tefillin every day, you kiss the mezuzah when you go out. For example, we make blessings, right? When do we make blessings? Before we eat? I'm sorry if I'm not looking at you all the time, but if we make blessings before we eat, after we finish eating. What's the purpose of the blessings? The Torah doesn't tell us to make blessings, but the rabbis felt that during this time that we have no Bet HaMikdash, that we're short of mitzvot, a Jew needs to be surrounded by mitzvot. When he wakes up in the morning, he says Modeh Ani. The Torah doesn't tell him to say Modeh Ani. Thank you, God, for making me wake up this morning. The Torah doesn't tell us to say the blessings Pokeach Ivrim. Thank you, God, for opening my eyes, or the other blessings that we say every morning. The rabbis felt that the Jew needs to be surrounded with mitzvot. They tell us, kiss the mezuzah when you go out, when you come in. Remember. And if you put on your tzitzit every morning, if you say Modeh Ani, you make the blessings before. In other words, you basically are saying, I know the food comes from you. Not from me, not from Ralph's, but from you. In other words, if you recognize the source of everything, that the source is God, then the chances are that you will not sin as easily. That is the purpose of being surrounded with mitzvot. And that is the purpose of all these acts that we will soon see with the Korban Pesach. Regardless of what they are, even small acts, details, the more you do them, and especially if you know what you're doing for, it's like a Korban. It brings you close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that is the idea behind the Korban. So why do we slaughter the Korban Pesach? Let's begin with that. What is the reason for slaughtering the Korban Pesach? Anybody know? The Korban Pesach was a lamb. That is one of the animals that you could bring for a sacrifice. And a lamb or a ram was astrologically the sign of Aries, which is the month when the Jewish people left Egypt. Not only is it the month that the Jewish people left Egypt, it was also one of the idols of the Egyptians. By slaughtering this Pesach, by slaughtering this taleh, we're basically slaughtering the idol of the Egyptians. We wanted nothing to do with them. We wanted to be completely separated from them. Not only not their slaves, but completely nothing to do with their faith, with their religions, with their creeds, with their beliefs. And that is what we do by slaughtering the Pesach. Not only do we slaughter the Pesach for that reason, but we're also showing that our redemption had nothing to do with any astrological factors. Hashem was responsible for taking us out of Egypt. It was not a coincidence. You know, some scientists claim, you know why the Red Sea split? Moses was smart. He was a scientist. He was a weatherman. They say all sorts of things about him. He knew exactly when the tide would be low. And by the way, it was a full moon at the time the Jews left. And he said, it's a full moon, the tide would be low, that would be perfect time. But did he also know that the Egyptians, as soon as they would cross, the tide would go back? I mean, it's ridiculous. What else did he know? Right? But again, people who try to stay away from openly accepting the Torah as divine word will try to explain everything. These are guys who do not want to deny everything. No, the story of the Bible is true, of course, but it's not divine. It could be explained in a different way. Again, just a way of staying away from religion. But we do know that this it was not a coincidence, it was not nature, it was not astrology. Sure. Nobody else, partner? All right. The month of Aries and so forth. But there's also another reason. Let me see if I can find it over here for you. The 12 months of the year are astrologically divided, zodiac divided by signs. So Nissan, the Jewish month of Nissan, when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, is the month of Aries, so the sign of Aries. Right? Astrologically, Aries is the sign at that time.
Aries belongs to...
Sure. Mazal Taleh. Astrology is Jewish. It's a Jewish science. But it was corrupted by the non-Jews, and they diluted it, and they added all sorts of things to it.
The Egyptian was on side.
Right, they did, sure. Once upon a time, astrology was a true science, even though the Egyptians, because they were into magic, they perhaps combined the two together. Nevertheless, it is a science, and they may not have known everything. They may not have known everything there is to know, but they did know quite a bit about it. But again, the Jewish people are above the mazal. They can change their mazal, and again, we're not affected or as concerned so much about it. But because some people might think that the mazal had something to do with it, again, Hashem wanted to take that out of our minds, and therefore He told us to bring the Korban Pesach. That is just another explanation for it. I believe that is the basic explanation. So let's go on to the next one. The slaughter of the Korban Pesach also had to be done, especially when it was in Egypt, in a public place. As we will soon see, part of the mitzvah of Pesach was to publicize it. We wanted to publicize to the Egyptians what we were doing. The reason behind it is that a Jew should not be afraid to fulfill the mitzvot, to go around identified as a Jew. Some Jews are embarrassed or are afraid of it. So a lot of these mitzvot were done publicly. In that, when I speak about the barbecue, we'll get a little bit more into that, why it had to be barbecued. And that is basically the reason for the sacrificing of the Pesach. Let's talk about the next mitzvah number 6, and that is the eating of the Pesach. Eating of the Pesach, again, as I said before, this was one of the sacrifices that was consumed almost entirely by its owners. The Kohanim had no part to it. The custom, of course, the halakha, the law was to eat this animal not as the main course, not as an entree either. It was a dessert. It was the last part of the meal. In order to emphasize the significance of what this is and what it represents, the Torah did not want you to have this as the main course. You would forget, we're going to have a good meal, we're going to have lamb stew. With this side dish and with that side dish. No, the purpose of this sacrifice is not for a good meal. Of course you're celebrating. Of course every holiday is a celebration. Of course every celebration the rabbi says should be with meat and with wine. In order for you to be happy, you need all these goodies. But that was not the emphasis of this sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. A sacrifice is holy. Sacrifice belongs to God. He lets you eat this one. This is for you, but it's His. And it's for Him, in other words. And therefore, in order for you to remember that it's for Him, that's not going to be your main course. It's going to be after you have eaten your entire meal. And you're full, al hasova, like we say in Hebrew. You're going to eat it al hasova, once you're satisfied. And you're not supposed to eat anything after it either. So you should remember what this is for. And we have, even though today we do not have the Korban Pesach, we do have something called afikoman. Afikoman is basically the last dish, if you want to call it so, on the Seder, and we have the same tradition of not eating anything after the afikoman for the same reasons. So the taste of the Korban Pesach should remain with you after the meal. You should remember what it's for. One of the conditions of eating this meal, of eating this animal, was that it should be eaten bechabura, in a family, in a groups of people. And the reasons are obvious. One person cannot eat the entire animal. And you're supposed to try your best not to leave over any of this animal. So what do? You made sure to have groups of people that they would all stick together and eat a chabura. And between everybody, you would be able to consume the entire animal. All right, the next mitzvah is tzli esh. This meat, this korban, had to be eaten as a barbecue. Why? One of the reasons is because in Egypt, everything was done b'chipazon. Everything was done quickly. They were in a hurry. Right? The matzah, the bread did not have enough time to rise. They left quickly, in a hurry. So that is one explanation as to the tzli esh. Eating it, barbecue, is a quick way of eating it. The Torah tells us not to eat it na umefushal. The words na, nun aleph, means half roasted. In other words, when you first begin to barbecue it, I think in today's jargon they would call it rare. Some people like their meat rare. This might be something close to that. When you just begin, it has just begun to barbecue, to roast, but that's not permitted. It has to be tzli esh. It has to be completely barbecue. Another reason for it is because barbecue, there's a lot. And again, as we said before, the idea was to publicize this, especially amongst the Egyptians. Hey, this is what we're doing to your Elil, it was not, again, we were not making fun of them. We don't make fun of anybody. What? Well, the blood you mean? The blood you get rid of with when you salt it. The problem is that you don't have to salt the meat when you're going to barbecue it. If you want to have kosher food, kosher meat, it's a big process. Not only does the animal have to be kosher, not only do you have to remove the veins that have the blood, not only do you have to slaughter it correctly, not only do you have to remove the fats, you have to soak the meat in water to soften it so that the salt that is applied can draw the blood for at least 20 minutes or so. Once you've done with all that, then of course you can cook it. But if you don't want to wait and go through all of that, you just barbecue it. The process of barbecuing draws out the entire blood. As long as, of course, you do it on a spit. If you're going to do it in the oven, the blood is going to be sitting underneath, and it's going to stay inside. So therefore, if you're going to have it rare, you might be right. If you haven't salted it first, you may not be taking out all the blood. That's a good point. So if you like it rare, salt it before. Salt the meat before, draw out all the blood, because we're not allowed to eat the blood, right? So therefore, draw out all the blood, and then that is how we do it with liver. When you get chicken liver, be sure that if it comes in a little bag in your chicken, like it sometimes does, that you do not cook it. Either barbecue it or somehow on a fire, on a flame where the blood can come down, because the butcher may not have done it for you, and it's not kosher that way. Unless you buy the liver directly from the butcher by itself, you can tell that it's dark. You can tell that he had already, passed it over the fire to take out the blood. Yes.
The specifications of sacrifice outline, the size of the korban, etc. So everybody. So was the size of the korban specified? So it had to be 3 years old.
Had to be a year old.
A year old.
Right. Couldn't be older. Had to
free of blemish or anything like.
Well, like all the sacrifices.
And did all the people bring their own to the temple over there?
The temple, that's where they slaughtered it. It was a very busy day for the Kohanim, because it used to be done in groups, and they would say Hallel, and they would say songs and so forth. This was done on the 14th day, by the way. 14th day, right before Pesach, right in the evening.
There were thousands of people.
Oh yeah, right. This was done, but it would go quickly, because all they needed to do was slaughter it. Then of course everything was done at home. The rest, the cleaning up, taking out. Yes, well, some of the things were done there, removing the skin, perhaps the hide, and so forth.
Another reason why it had to be
barbecue.
That's the oneness of it, or the achdut of it, so it doesn't fall apart.
Oh yeah,
only barbecue can keep that.
Right, you can say several things, because barbecue, you can have the whole animal intact, even though according to the procedure, the insides were on him. In other words, they took out all the insides, the intestines, and put it on top. Because if you would eat the intestines and if you would leave them inside, they would be cooked inside, and they would also have to be barbecued. So they took out the intestines and put it on top. So there were many details. So that could also be another explanation. Yes? The Kohanim, the priests, all have a share of they have shares of certain sacrifices that goes to them, certain parts of the animal. That particular sacrifice does not belong to the Kohanim, to the priests. It belonged only to the owners, to those who brought it. It was special in that the Kohanim had no share to it. Yes, yeah. Everybody brought their own. Everybody ate their own. Right.
What about the poor people?
They could participate in a chabura, in a group. If you don't have too much money, you could participate in a group, in your family. Right? The Torah says one per family or per group, so everybody could pitch in. Oh, sure, everybody did. Yeah, it was a beautiful experience. All right, so that's the idea of barbecuing it. There's others who give other explanations that's we are like kings, and part of the celebration is that we behave and feel like kings, and the kings used to eat their meat barbecued, and that is another explanation. All right, let's go to the last mitzvah, and that is not to leave over any of the meat. You're supposed to eat it in that night and not leave anything over. The reason, of course, for not leaving over anything is because the mitzvah of eating that korban is only during that night. You can't leave it over for another day when it's not Pesach anymore. And since it's a sacrifice, it has certain limitations. as to where it can be eaten and where you can take it. And therefore the rabbis say that even though you're allowed to eat it the whole night, the mitzvah was to try to finish it by midnight. Why by midnight? To distance him from the avirah. What does it mean to distance him from sin? Women light candles today 18 minutes before sunset. Why don't they light a candle a minute before sunset? Sunset is Shabbat, right? Why 18 minutes? Two basic reasons. Reason number one, which is the acceptable reason, is that there is a mitzvah of bringing the Shabbat a little bit earlier. Even though Shabbat begins, let's say, this week at 5:15 is candle lighting, so sunset would be 5:33, right, 18 minutes later. There's a mitzvah not to begin at that 1 minute, but to begin a little bit earlier, to show that you're looking forward to the Shabbat. That's reason one. Reason two is because you cannot know exactly, you may be off a minute. You don't want to be just take a chance and a minute before Shabbat, that's it. What if it's a cloudy day? What if you don't have a watch? In those days, remember, it was more difficult to tell the time. So therefore, to be on the safe side, you lit a little bit earlier. You made sure you finished everything earlier. Made sure that you had nothing in your pockets as soon as it became dark, a little bit dark, because you didn't want to go out carrying something you were not supposed to or carrying at all. So that means that the rabbis put up all sorts of fences. Make sure you stay away. I'll give you another example. Many of you, I'm sure, have attended weddings where they serve coffee and cream, right? How do you know it's cream and not milk? Maybe it's milk and you've just had prime rib. So how could you have the milk? So how do you know it's cream? You take it for granted, you just pour cream, whatever's in that little jar. How do we know that that's cream? How do you know you could take it? Even though there's a nice card that this event is supervised by such and such a supervision, how do you know? Perhaps they made a mistake. Perhaps the waiter didn't know. Perhaps the waiter came by and offered you. So how do you know it's cream and not milk? Anybody know? I mean, how do you know? What? Let me give you another example and I'll show you the difference. The Sephardic Jews in Mexico and perhaps elsewhere, especially from Syrian origin, have a favorite drink called sharab loz. Sharab loz is a drink made from almonds. It's white. It looks like milk. If you look at the jar, the crystal jar or transparent jar, you think it's milk, especially if it's with ice. It looks good. It's a little foamy. It's very tasty. It's a lot of work to prepare it. But it looks just like milk. It's a drink from almonds and it's white. So the halacha says, the Shulchan Aruch already recognizes that there is such a drink back then. It says if you're going to be serving that kind of a drink at a meal where you're eating meat, you should put some almonds around that jar so people should know that is that drink from the almonds. Because of marit ayin, right? You don't want people to be suspicious, so therefore avoid suspicions and take precautions. Put almonds around it. So that is a precaution. With milk, with the creamer, at weddings, you don't have to take a similar precaution in putting the carton of cream there, because for a simple reason, everybody knows that what is served at weddings is cream. So there is another rule that says if everybody knows, there are no suspicions. Everybody knows that what's served is coffee and cream, not milk. Nobody serves milk. But if people do not know, like with that drink that most of you perhaps have never seen or heard of, you might suspect, this guy's having milk with his prime rib. If he had some almonds around it, perhaps he would either ask or remember that this is perhaps some other drink. So the idea is not to raise suspicions and to the rabbis put up all sorts of fences. And the fence over here that they erected with consuming the Korban Pesach is try to finish it by midnight. So there's nothing is left over. And whatever is left over, you should burn it. Why should you burn it? Anybody suggestions? Why should you burn whatever is left over? Why can't you just do something else with it? Right. Burning is a quick way to get rid of it. If you don't burn it immediately, some of it might still be left over. And Torah, of course, did not want you to be disrespectful to it or somehow throw it away, or something else may happen to it that is not permissible. And that is why they told us to burn it. Last but not least, I just wanted to add the point that the Geulah, the redemption of Passover, occurred in the month of Nissan. And our tradition says that just like we were redeemed from Egypt in the month of Nissan, we will be redeemed again very soon from this galut in the month of Nissan. Why is there a connection between Nissan in Egypt and Nissan right now? Two redemptions. Because we must remember that the redemption of Egypt was not only from slavery, from servitude to freedom. It was ultimately also from the impurities that existed in Egypt to spirituality. Almost immediately after our redemption from Egypt, we received the Torah. We became a nation. We got the Mitzvot. We became a totally different people. And perhaps, that is one of the reasons some rabbis say the generation that left Egypt was not the one to enter Israel. All the generation, except for two people, basically two. Some say, well, there's an additional third, but basically Caleb ben Yefuneh and Yoshua ben Nun, they are the only ones who left Egypt, who made it. Even Moshe didn't make it into Israel. Aaron didn't make it. Miriam, no, everybody died. That whole generation died in Egypt, in the desert. Only the new generation. No, the whole generation. No, all the generation, the whole generation, only their kids. I'm not going to get into all the reasons of why. Yes, I'm not going to get into all the reasons of why they did not make it. But one explanation is that they had a different mentality, having been through Egypt. Even though they were righteous, even though they were good, they had a different mentality. And they were not necessarily the ones who were prepared to accept all the mitzvot and do them in Israel the way they're supposed to. These are people who just went through so much and had undergone so much affliction. And here they just became free men, right? It was something of a challenge to them, to give them a yoke of mitzvot to carry out and to do in Israel. It is only through their children, which was a second generation, that they saw the miracles, that they were the ones who merited to enter Israel. So the connection between Nissan of Egypt and Nissan of Geulah Atidah, of the future redemption, is that this redemption that we're awaiting any day will also be very similar in many ways. First, it will be a redemption from all the impurities. Because even though we're not slaves today as we were then, the rabbis tell us in the Kabbalah that when you're stuck in the mud of impurities, of not Tumah only, but in the garbage that there is in the world today, you are like enslaved to it. How many people would live? Let me give you an example. Let's say you had a 2-story home with a basement, 3 maids, 4 cars, 2 of them Acuras and 1 Lexus, and earning, let's put it this way, you are in the 33% bracket in the income tax return, and you have a lot of investments. Why should you move to Israel? Your house, you don't live in Malibu where your house is sliding down the hill, and you're not in you're in a very comfortable position. You are the CEO of a big company. Why should you leave? You're basically tied down to this galut. You're not a slave, but you are to something else, right? People who are workaholics, they're slaves too. They're slaves to the money. They want to make money. They don't realize that money is a means, it's not a goal. What are you running after money for, right? So they're slaves, right? Pesach is a time to remember that we're not only became free from Egypt, from Pharaoh, we're supposed to become free from everything that enslaves us in this world. Because the only way a Jew can do the mitzvot of Hashem is if he has one master, and that's him. You can't have 2 masters. If money is going to be your master and he too, I believe in you, but I also believe in my money, you're going to have a problem. People believe in their money. You can't have 2 masters. You can only have one master. Pesach is a time when we have the family, the Seudah, the Seder, the Korban Pesach, when there was a temple, is to remember about these things, about the miracles, about the liberty, not just a physical liberty, but a spiritual liberty. Thank God, every time Friday evening I come home, I sit with the family, I say, thank God we have Shabbat. I wish it was 3 days long, not 1 day. Shabbat? You forget about it, you don't read the papers, you shouldn't read them any day, full of garbage. But if you do, I hope you don't read them on Shabbat. Some people are slaves, they're addicted to it, they can't go a day without it. What would happen if you read it Saturday night? Are you going to lose touch? People are addicted to it. And that is what we talk about when we mean freedom. Freedom from all these addictions. You don't smoke. If you smoke a whole week, you hope you don't smoke on Shabbat, right? So you're being freed from all these addictions that we are slaves to. A Jew needs to remember that Israel is his home. Here we're in the Galut. We were kicked out. Why? Just because we were kicked out, there's no mitzvah to stay here. Why should you stay here? But people are comfortable, and they know it's going to be a struggle to adapt in Israel. But Israel is the place, destination that we need to go to. And people who don't at least think of it, then they truly think that this is their home, and that's a big mistake. That's what the Jews in Berlin thought. Yeah. Well, guess what will happen guess what will happen when you come to Israel? Then there will be less Chilonim and more Datim, right?
More Datim, no.
No, there's no such argument. No, there's no such argument. No, they believe that you're not obligated to go.
They don't even recognize the state of Israel.
That's something else. That's a completely separate thing. But the land of Israel was always the land of Israel, regardless of who its inhabitants and rulers were. We had Greeks, we had Romans, we had all sorts of rulers, and today we have other kinds of rulers who are not very, very Jewish, but at least they have built an infrastructure, they have planted trees, they have made orchards, and they also contributed. They deserve some credit, even though they're not behaving themselves in many ways, but they should get some credit, and therefore I don't look down at anybody. If he's Jewish and if he contributed a little bit to Israel, he deserves some credit for it. We don't agree with all of them, we don't like some of them, but if they all fought and gave their blood and their life for Israel, then they have some credit. We have a tradition that any Jew who fought for his people, for Israel, and died, he has Chelek L'Olam Haba. He's in Gan Eden, regardless of how secular or religious he was. Of course, his share is not as large as those who live their lives in an observant way. Nevertheless, they also deserve some credit. In any event, this is the last point that I wanted to make. Next week, we will continue with the rest of the details of the Pesach. And again, I think there's about 4 or 5 additional mitzvot. One of them is a very interesting one, and that is that you're not allowed to give of your Pesach to a non-Jew. You cannot invite to eat your Pesach together with you a Jew who is no longer following Judaism. And this not only applies today in a different way. Today it basically applies to those who invite. You may invite somebody to come over and experience the Shabbat, but he may come by car. You cannot invite him if he's going to come by car. That's another issue. The issue that we'll be discussing next week is why can a Jew who became what we call in Hebrew a meshumad, he no longer believes in this. Or he doesn't believe in Shabbat, for example, but even though if he eats kosher, Shabbat is so significant and fundamental that he's considered a meshumad. And therefore you cannot eat from this Pesach. Another individual who cannot eat from the Korban Pesach is a little boy, a child, or an older man who was never circumcised. If he was never circumcised, he cannot share the Korban Pesach. These are, again, additional details that we'll be discussing next week. But what I wanted to bring out towards the end, again, was Pesach is the most difficult holiday for women because there's a lot of preparation. But it helps to know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, then you will enjoy it. And you will not look at it as hard. And the same is true with the rest of Judaism. The more we understand, the more we know about it, the more we study about it, the more we will appreciate, and the more we will thank God for having chosen us to follow the Torah and to do His mitzvot. Okay, so next week, if you have any questions, again, I'll take some questions, but next week we'll continue with the further. Yes?
Why the mitzvah of Korban Pesach hasn't been practiced 2,000 years.
Right.
She was probably didn't even bother focusing on it. It's been a mitzvah.
No, there are some yeshivot that are focusing and learning the halachot that will apply when Mashiach will come. Mashiach is coming. There are special groups in Israel who are learning the halachot of the Bet HaMikdash, of the korbanot. And these are difficult halachot because not everybody knows them. Not everybody has been learning them, as you said, because they haven't been relevant. And therefore, we don't have real models of what the Mizbeach looks like and how we're going to be doing it. So the Chafetz Chaim, blessed memory, and others have encouraged boys in yeshiva and others to learn more, at least more about these halachot. So when the time comes, and it will come very, very soon, we should be ready. Yeah, especially if you're a Kohen, you need to be ready. But even if you're not a Kohen, our tradition says that the Leviim will also become Kohanim, the Israelim will become Leviim. We will all go up in at least one level. And we will all have, of course, the privilege of having those mitzvot that once upon a time we had come back again very soon. Yeah.
Today, since the Korban Pesach is only symbolically done with Yafikomim, can you invite a goy or a Jew to the Sunnah or no?
No. The custom is that for a Passover meal, the halacha is actually the custom, the halacha.
The custom or
I have to look it up again. I forget. Let me see. I think it's very much insisted. It's not a halacha. It's very much insisted. And that's just discouraged, but it's insisted that for all the meals of the year, Pesach is the one that you should not have somebody who's not qualified, or I want to use a nicer word, somebody who does not fit the individuals that are mentioned in the Torah. But for Shabbat, for another holiday, it's okay.
If somebody is not prune, but not because they're Meshumah, they don't know any better,
That's different, right? We're only talking about a Meshumat. Meshumat will be somebody who knows about Shabbat and publicly doesn't care. It's one thing if he in his home he does certain things, but if he publicly he violates the Shabbat and he knows about it, or even if he doesn't know, he's still in the same category of Meshumat. Yeah, so those are the individuals who, of course, if you can help them, you should say a word or two, but not for Pesach. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, breaking the bone of the Pesach is for next week, but I don't know if you'll be here, so maybe I'll tell you a little bit about it. But I will be discussing, that's one of the mitzvot I'll be discussing next week. Ve'etzem lo tishberu bo, the Torah said, Parashat Bo, you should not break any bones of that sacrifice. The basic explanation for it is not to consume the Pesach in a, I don't know what the word in English would be. Don't be a pig about it. I have to use that one, that's the only word I can think about. A glutton. And the gluttonous people will break bones and eat everything apart. Again, this idea of Korban Pesach was not a main course. It was supposed to be a special course at the end of the meal after you're already filled. And by breaking bones, one of the explanations, I'll discuss it a little bit more in detail next week, one of them was that you would be showing somehow a disrespect, or you would be lessening the value of it and treating it just as any other meal. Whereas this was more significant, it meant something. What you were eating, why were you eating this? And so we wanted to treat it differently. That is the basic reason. Yeah. Yes?
There were some events that left with the Israelis.
Yeah, I know some of them. Yeah.
So this is a contradiction.
The what?
There were some that left.
Right.
With Moshe.
Right.
And so...
They all died in the desert. All these people died in the desert. Some of them before others. But you were saying it was difficult for you to understand this because of what?
You can't eat, you can't have,
You
can't have a gentleman
participate in the Korban Pesach. Right? If you had, for example, you had a little boy, right, who was 8 days old. At the time you have to bring a Korban Pesach, and you haven't circumcised him, you cannot eat yourself the Korban Pesach until your boy is circumcised. So not only could the boy not eat, an individual who was not circumcised, but even his father, or the one who was responsible for him, could not eat from the Korban Pesach. So again, there were certain restrictions, which we'll discuss next week. Yeah. Yes?
Rabbi, where is it said that the mitzvahs we do here are just a practice? Everything's really focused on Eretz Israel. We're really doing the mitzvahs here just for practice.
Which one is for practice?
Well, isn't that one rabbi's comment like that, Rabbi? That, the mitzvahs done in the college were just really done for practice. The real essence of the mitzvahs is they're supposed to be performed in the land of Israel. Hashem had in mind Jewish people would be in the land of Israel, and that's where the mitzvahs are made to be performed.
Well, certain mitzvot can only be done in Israel. That's true. And a mitzvah that is done in Israel is different than if it's done outside of Israel. But nevertheless, we still have to do the mitzvot that are applicable today, regardless of where we are, Alaska or the USA or anywhere. They still apply. Some mitzvot do not apply. They are strictly limited to the land of Israel. Many of the agricultural mitzvot. But the circumcision, for example, Shabbat, all these are not for practice. That is what maintains our Jewishness, if we follow those mitzvot, regardless of where you are. Again, kosher laws, if you're in danger, you have nothing to eat, then of course, that would be a situation where it doesn't, not that it doesn't apply, it is permitted for you to go ahead and eat that food that is not kosher because you're in danger of starvation. It doesn't mean that, not that it doesn't apply, but it's permitted for you in that situation. Circumcision is permitted on Shabbat if the boy is born on Shabbat, because that is the day it has to be done, so it's permitted, and so forth. There are certain things that are not permitted under any circumstances, right? We discussed that, idol worshipping, committing adultery, or killing another individual if it's not in self-defense or if it's not in the war and so forth. Under no circumstances, especially if it's, especially if, again, if you're not in danger, if you're not in a situation where, because for example, if you're in danger, we're told that you're supposed to try to injure him first, if you can. But if you're in imminent danger, then of course you can't think of that. There are many details, and depending on the situation you're in, the mitzvot apply all the time. Yeah, you cannot break the mitzvot, you cannot change them. The Torah is a sealed book. The Torah says so. You cannot add, you cannot take off. But the mitzvot that some people ask about, how come we can't? You're a Jew. You claim you're a Jew. How come you're not fulfilling all these mitzvot? Because they don't apply. Not all the mitzvot apply all the time. As I said before, if you don't want to eat meat, you're a vegetarian, then you don't have to fulfill the mitzvah of slaughtering. There is another mitzvah: divorce your wife. You don't have to divorce your wife, but if you want to divorce her, then there is a prescribed way how to go about it. You have to do it this way. You can't just say goodbye. That's not, even though the Arabs do that. They say goodbye 3 times, and that's it. But with the Jewish people, there's a way to do it. And of course, it's first discouraged. But if you're going to do it, if you're going to have to do it, there's a way to do the things. If you're going to eat meat, you have to slaughter it, you have to take out the blood, you have to salt it, take out the veins, take out the sciatic nerve. You don't have to do all these things if you don't want to eat meat. Same with the mezuzah. You don't have to build a parapet. You know what a parapet is? A ma'akeh. On top of your, if you have a rail or some sort, if you have a deck, you need to do that because you don't want to be an indirect cause of somebody's injury on your home. But let's say you don't have a home, you don't have a deck, then you don't have the ma'akeh. If you don't see the certain birds sitting on their eggs, if you don't see it, you're never going to be doing this mitzvah. I mean, so there are certain mitzvot that only come about at certain times. The holidays are permanent, constant, and then you have mitzvot that are once in a while they come about. There's an interesting mitzvah called yibum, which is not applied today for other reasons. That is, if somebody, God forbid, his brother passed away and he and his wife never had kids, and he left behind brothers, even though they're married, there was a mitzvah of yibum to marry that deceased brother's wife and have children with her. And if they didn't like each other, they would have a chalitza. A chalitza means a separation of a sort that would permit that woman to go marry another man. But the brother came first. The brother had the option. Again, that only applies under those rare situations you still have it today where people have to do a chalitza because their brother passed away without having any kids. And the wife cannot marry somebody else until she goes through the process of chalitza. Today we don't allow yibum. So again, these are mitzvot that can occur, but just because you did not perform it does not mean you haven't kept entire Torah. Certain mitzvot apply only to kohanim, to you. Right? Certain mitzvot apply during the time that there was a Bet HaMikdash. Right? So not all the mitzvot apply all the time. But if you do have an opportunity to do a mitzvah and you don't do it, then of course that's a sin. If you have an opportunity to do something and you let go of it, then of course you will be blamed for it. But if you couldn't do it, if it didn't apply to you, then you're not blamed for it. Even though according to the Kabbalah, there is a tradition that all the souls need to fulfill all the mitzvot in the Torah and they come back, all 613, and somehow they come back either in reincarnation or it's something called ibur. Ibur means that they become impregnated into somebody else. In other words, you may have somebody who needs a particular mitzvah. He never did it. And he may temporarily come and impregnate himself in you until you do that mitzvah. And so he gets a little bit of the credit for doing that, even though he never did it. So again, these are things that are deeper.
So, leaving you after that?
Yeah, he lets go. He only comes for a week or two. And you don't even feel it. He comes, short visit, impregnates. You don't even feel it. Sometimes the souls come like that to help you, to assist in a particular mitzvah. And again, that's already a little deeper. But we have enough mitzvot to worry about without that. To make sure that we do them correctly, with the right kavanot, with the right thoughts. They should be complete and intact. And in other words, according to the true ideas that the Torah had in mind of how we should do it. And mitzvah, of course, that is done without the kavanah, without the thoughts, then is like as we said before, incomplete. In order for a mitzvah to be complete, it needs to have at least the thoughts, the right ideas behind it. Rabbis tell us, for example, when you pray and you don't think about what you're praying, then your prayers maybe go up 10 feet. That's where they stop. They don't go to heaven. They have no wings to fly. They're missing the wings. The wings are the kavanot. If a person wants his prayers to be heard, he should do two things. He should first know what he's saying, understand what he's saying, and have tears when he's saying it. And of course, he must be clean. I mean, if he has many sins on his record, imagine. I got a ticket once that was wrong, and I contested it, and they denied it. And then I applied for a hearing, a written hearing, and I won. And the guy said, "You were right. They were wrong. The officer was wrong. There's no such law that applies." Anyway, they were wrong. And I was right, and I was entitled to a refund. And at the end it says, but you're only going to get a refund if you don't have any other tickets that I do. So I said, of course, that makes sense. Well, the same applies to the prayers. If you pray, even if you have tears, and you say it with all good kavanot and intentions, if you have a bad record, but this guy is praying alligator, crocodile tears.
It might erase the bad stuff you did though.
What?
It's like if you
Right.
erase the other tickets, it might erase the other stuff.
Right, it does help a little bit, but it may not get him what he wants. It may only go so far. So that's why tzaddikim. Why do we go for blessings by tzaddikim? Because they have a good record, hopefully. So we use them as an extra push, to give us, if maybe God will listen to His blessing, even though anybody can bless you, and that blessing can come true from an ordinary man. But if a righteous man blesses you, there's a better chance. But you also have to deserve it. You have to be deserving of it, and His words need to be powerful enough to make an impression. And sometimes, regardless of the blessings, if your mazal, if your destiny is meant to be like this, nothing will change. Some couples have no children, God forbid, even though they've gone to all the graves of all the rabbis, gotten all the blessings, given all charity. There's a reason why He wants them to be childless. And sometimes that may go away after 25 years. So we never end up knowing, why did they end up having children after 25? Was it this guy's blessing? Was it the charity that did it? Was it a combination of all? We never know. We will never know. So that's why, because we don't know, it pays to do everything. Bet on all of them, like they say, and you may get something out of it. But we do know that the most effective of all, more effective than a blessing, more effective than anything else, is his own prayer. His own prayer can be very effective. The rabbis tell us when a sick person prays, Hashem listens to his prayer a lot more. If it's sincere, he's the one that's sick. If his heart is broken, Hashem will listen to him. Even though we do have another saying that says a prisoner cannot free himself from jail. You cannot free yourself from jail. The reason the rabbis tell us that saying is because rabbis themselves, great rabbis, have been childless too. And their wives would come to them, how come you bless people with children and they get children, and you can't bless yourself? Bless yourself. No, you can't. A prisoner cannot free himself from prison. A rabbi cannot bless himself. It has to be somebody else. But that's only true with blessings. When it comes to a sickness, the rabbi tells us just the opposite. That a sick person, Hashem listens to his prayer before He listens to others. Because his heart is broken as a result of his sickness, and it's his problem. He's praying for his own problems. So we underestimate the power of prayer. Yeah, right. Yitzhak is always more powerful, what we call a minyan, than an individual praying at home. Not only that, if you pray at home and you pray in the Bet HaKnesset, the Bet HaKnesset is holier, is more powerful. But a tzibur is a lot more powerful. That's very true. And I'll be discussing a little bit about this next week. When we talk about the haburot, the groups of people eating the Korban Pesach. Imagine a whole group fasting. It makes a big impression. A whole group of kids saying Tehillim. Why I say kids? Because kids do not have any sins. If they learn Torah, if they say Tehillim, it could make a big difference upstairs. It all depends on what's going on. If there's a terrible decree, or if it's a small decree. For example, if somebody had a terrible dream, and that dream may just come true, or parts of it. The rabbi tells us, if you give charity, we pray, you may cancel the dream. How could that be? Even though we know charity is powerful, but sometimes what is meant to happen is not necessarily a decree that has been set in stone. Sometimes they otherwise, why are they telling you this in the dream? Just to frighten you a little more? Oh, by the way, this is going to happen to you. Don't let me know. Right? The reason why we dream, we're talking about the real dreams, not the fake ones, which are the majority, but the very few dreams that we do know, that we do see, some of them are messages, some of them are just future events, some of them are just a person who has passed away in the family who comes to tell you Mazel Tov on the birth of your child. So some of them are not as significant as others, but if it's a terrible dream and you have a feeling and really that it's bad, that it disturbs you, you can't sleep, you can't go on sleeping, it's like a nightmare, then of course that's all that might be necessary to get rid of it, is some act, some deed, a fast, tzedakah, because that's all that, because sometimes God sends you a message, He wants you to wake up. So it's not the act that is annulling or canceling the dream, it's the fact that you woke up. That's all He wanted. He wanted just to wake you up. So and sometimes He does so by way of dreams. Sometimes if that does not work, something else, God forbid, in life could happen that may wake up somebody, and hopefully he gets the message. Some people don't never get the message. It's too bad. They just say, "Oh, it's happening to everybody. Everybody's losing money." The rabbis encourage us very, very much to examine our deeds anytime something happens, especially if it's happening one after another, when it cannot be just part of our mazal. Somebody's after us. In other words, perhaps we did do something wrong. Somebody today I met, he's not here, so I could say it. I asked him, how's business? He's, let me see, you sure he's not here? Yeah, he's a locksmith. And he says, business is not doing well. I says, well, I'll tell you why. I think probably crime rate is down, right? Because he does a lot of fixing for break-ins and locks and security. He says, yeah, how do you know? But then he says, you know what? But that's not the real reason. I have a feeling I've been doing something wrong. And he asks me, tell me if this is okay or not. Somebody comes complaining to me that the lock is not working. And I know that in order to get it to work, I just have to fix it a little bit, push it here and fix it there. And instead I tell her or him, you need a new lock. Is that cheating? I tell him, yes, it's not cheating, it's called lying. It has different names, but it's not permitted. Oh, says, you know what? Forget about the crime rate. I think that's why I'm not doing well. Yeah. You see, at least he had some common sense. I mean, he's been around. He's heard a lot of this. He's studied a little bit. Had he not studied, then he wouldn't have even thought about that. But he said perhaps he was able to relate it too. The only way he could have back his parnasah, his mazal, perhaps in his case, again, there's a good chance, 50-50 at least, is if he were honest. Anybody else? Okay. Yes. What is that? If what? Meshumad? Right. That would be one example of a typical meshumad. Right. It comes from the word shemad. Yeah. In other words, to let go of your people and to adapt another people. Not necessarily, but it's something like that. What? No, different terms. A person who denies, who becomes an atheist or an agnostic, it's not a meshumad, but they're very similar. As far as the Korban Pesach, neither one, right? Okay, so we'll continue next week.